I'm going to give a synopsis of my ideas because I think time looks like it's tight. Um, some long-standing manifestations of Blackness speak to a struggle for our humanity to be heard. If you look at the works of David Walker and Sojourner Truth and Black Lives Matter, you see this impulse towards ethically manifested humanity. Um, these truth statements, however, by Blacks are often marginalized by forms of whiteness that defines its subjectivities in terms of disingenuous statements to support self states of superiority and dominion. Blackness, among other forms of truth speaking, challenges the normalized and systematized lies of oppression. A post truth environment is refreshingly confusing and anxiety provoking as we recommit to an imagining of first principles and shared truths. We live in a time, we've always lived in a time of contingency, which in turn produces uncertainty and anxiety. And we face the task of loving and producing in ways that result in some reasonably sense of subjective well-being and at the group level reproductive success. We're seeing more now that that also is based on being ethical stewards of the environment rather than dominion, domination of it. As such, we're curious and anxious in our unending quest for resources. We struggle with the tyranny of desire and production in pursuit of an ever elusive satiation. And we seem to have a ethos that all is never enough instead of trying to exist within good enough. So, one of the ways we can think of our humanity is very much being predicated on um, the quest for resources. And here, in talking about resources, not in sort of Amartya Sen's way of resources, material resources, but also access to rights, privileges, decency, accountability, issues like that. So it's not clear why, given our reflective abilities, why we've evolved in a manner that requires dominion and the marginalization of community, which of course leads to the decoupling of truth from ethics. Facts as a foundation of truth are often artfully distorted by this need to dominate and therefore marginalize ethically informed truths as embodied in the practices of others. A long and deplorable tradition in white truth making, where facts were in the service of bolstering the illusion of white superiority and predation. So, for example, you have a chain of being arguments which argues of a hierarchy based on intellect and color, with whites at the top, blacks at the bottom, and the distances between them could never be reduced. You also have the narrowing definitions of intellect that privilege a particular canon and interpretive stance. So, dream work, intergenerational legacies passed on outside of the formal educational system are often either marginalized or vilified. It will remain an enduring mystery how people like Bob Marley, Burning Spear, were able to speak and sing about the issues that they could sing about, despite the absence of those themes within the Jamaican educational system. Okay. We also see an adroit silence regarding the issue of resources and interdependencies. We have a situation here in New York where we have three specialized high schools, three or four, and the students have to take a special test to get into these schools. And what we're finding is that a school like Bronx Science or Stuyvesant High, which are two of the elite schools, with an intake of 700 every September, they admit less than 12 Black students. And the issue that always comes up is a chain of being argument that the Blacks are just not good enough. Well, the NAACP filed a lawsuit on the basis that the students in junior high school were not being taught, these Black and Latino students were not being taught curriculum that was being tested on this exam. So the trigonometry, the algebra, all of those things, they were not being taught. So how could the kids pass it? The argument was then brought up that low-income Asian kids would pass this exam. And what we found out, a student of mine, interestingly, had to leave a class early and said, I have to go home and tutor my brother on the specialized tests because I went to the school, I know what the test is about, and we've got these organized forums for the kids to learn it. Black and Latino students, of course, don't have those forums. So what you find is there is a oftentimes willful ignorance of how Black lives are actually lived, leading to a very convenient essentializing of them as being, not very bright, party animals, violence prone. One could argue cynically that they have not yet learned how to systematize violence in a way that you do it with a keyboard, such as the legal and deeply unethical performances of the hedge fund companies in terms of the nursing homes. What's interesting, however, is how their Black lifestyles are routinely appropriated and commodified without credit. And a little experiment you can carry out is listen to the ads, listen to the music behind the ads, and listen to the rhythms of it, and you clearly hear Africana themes. The first time I heard Adele singing, I just heard it. I didn't know who she was. I swore it was a Black woman. Okay. These fictions of Black inferiority and white superiority are deeply embedded in white culture as truth, as normalized, as background that you don't even question. They're driven by both the necessity and the fear of many whites of acknowledging equality, commonalities, and interdependencies. That's what drives the truth distortion, that I, by definition, being white, must be superior. I'm autonomous, of course, conveniently overlooking the tremendous structure and privileges that allow them to do that, which is not accessible to Blacks. Again, another fiction that is treated as, as truth. What are the possibilities given all of this? Blackness speaks to a morality as a constraint on primitive enactments, both within Blackness and between Blackness and whiteness. The effort, for example, that Black Lives movements have had to put into policing the boundary between rightful rage and mayhem is just incredible, a story that you don't often hear about. David Walker in his appeal speaks to our deep human commonalities and therefore the right to be treated in an ethical manner. Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Reverend William Barber, and Black Lives Movement all continue to speak to a truth that's grounded in ethics. Finally, there's the issue of atonement. And here I'm making a difference between symbolic atonement and substantive atonement. Symbolic atonement is what you often see with a lot of whites circulating around privilege denial and angst and whatnot, and toppling statues and renaming buildings. And that's all very well and good, but does it then lead to substantive atonement, where there is an acknowledgement of the deep damage done, and that there is a tight rein on what I call the refusal of power. The refusal of power shows itself in symbolic atonement, where you see the apology and then you hear the strange statement, well, what should I do? Black folks are very familiar with this, where you're in a job, you're in a junior management role, and suddenly you're the expert on Black, because the elites, the white elites, they don't know what to do. They don't give up their authority, but they act as if they don't know what to do. And that's really a very serious obstacle to atonement, because you're saying certain things, but your actions continue to be the same because suddenly you are ignorant. And of course, if by chance you know anything about what you do, you co-opt it and you become an expert. We have a phenomenon here in New York. We got white folks turning around and explaining what it is to be a black analyst. Okay, so we need more procedural atonement where there's a substantive attempt to really look at institutions, look at the edifice of lies that sustain them, and begin the process of revisiting our first principles and ethically trying to see if systems can be restructured. I'll stop there.